Welcome to Wisdom 8 to 8, dedicated to stamping out spiritual malnutrition one episode at a time. I'm Bob Buchanan.
Who are you who are so wise?
If you haven't heard or seen the PureFlix movie Unplanned, released March 29th, you should try to get to it before it leaves the theaters. The movie is based on the autobiography of Abby Johnson, a Texas woman who became the youngest Planned Parenthood clinic director in the organization's history. Abby began volunteering at the clinic first by ushering women from their cars into the clinic, especially when pro-life activists became more aggressive in their tactics, shouting at the women to reconsider their decision. Abby rose through the ranks of the clinic personnel. She became a counselor to the women and then eventually the clinic administrator. In 2008, Abby won Planned Parenthood's Employee of the Year award. Well, sometime in 2009, Abby was called from her office to assist Dr. Anthony Levantino for an abortion. And it was the first and only time she did. And by the way, Dr. Levantino plays himself in the film, as does the attending nurse in that very pivotal scene. As Abby watched the procedure on the ultrasound monitor, she saw the baby of the womb recoil at the doctor's probes that would take its life. She wrote in her autobiography that she believed that infant in the womb felt no pain as it was being removed from the womb. But as she watched the ultrasound monitor, she saw something that changed her life. She could tell that the baby felt a threat and the pain, and she wrote that she had to get a grip. But as she watched, the next movement was the sudden jerk of a tiny foot as the baby started kicking, as if trying to move away from the probing invader. As the cannula pressed in, the baby began struggling to turn and twist away, and it seemed clear to me, she wrote, that the fetus could feel the cannula and did not like the feeling. And then the doctor's voice broke through, startling me. "Beam me up, Scotty," he said lightheartedly to the nurse, and he was telling her to turn on the suction. It was at this point that Abby's confidence in the rightness of her worldview crumbled. She became nauseous, and she ran into the restroom, vomited, and sat on the floor sobbing. She realized everything she believed about her work was built on a series of lies. In September of 2009, Abby resigned her position at the clinic and soon afterwards became a pro-life advocate with an organization depicted in the film called 40 Days for Life. Abby claims that her time working with Planned Parenthood, she was complicit in 22,000 abortions. In terms of production, this movie won't win any screen awards, even if it were produced by the likes of Steven Spielberg or George Lucas. PureFlix is new to the movie streaming business that started in 2005. The movie-making company produces films for family audiences. The directing and cinematography of Unplanned are well done. The musical soundtrack is appropriate, and the acting is, for the most part, adequate. However, I do agree with Owen Lieberman, chief film critic for Variety magazine, that the part of Cheryl, the director of the clinic when Abby began, was written as a kind of Cruella de Vil of abortion. At one point in the film, Cheryl spits out her venom at Abby, who challenged her about cranking up the quota of abortions. Abby sincerely believed that her role was to decrease the number of abortions by decreasing unwanted pregnancies. To Cheryl, this was a threat to her corporate ambitions and compared Planned Parenthood clinics to fast food restaurants. She said to Abby in one scene, "Let me explain something to you. Fast food outlets look to break even on the hamburgers they sell. That's all they do is break even. Do you know how they make their money? On French fries and soda, the low-cost, high-margin items. Abortion is our French fries and soda. But somehow you've decided that it's no longer your priority. Abortion is what pays your salary. Corporate policy is simple," she said. "We are an abortion provider." But this movie really isn't about film artistry. Although lots of artistic skill has gone into it, it's a movie intended to send a blunt and realistic message that steps into the middle of the moral, political, and judicial debate over abortion, the definition of when human life begins, a woman's right to so-called reproductive health, and by implication, the free-ranging sexual revolution. As you might expect, those who defend abortion, for any reason or no reason, debunk the movie as religious propaganda with no factual basis. For example, a review in the online news outlet The Daily Beast said, "Unplanned is the cinematic equivalent of an anti-abortion pamphlet peddled by one of those holier-than-thou creeps who lurks outside clinics, reciting biblical quotes in order to terrorize often young women looking for much-needed reproductive health care." Notice how abortion language is being framed as reproductive health care. The moral idea of a baby isn't even in view in a statement like that. Moviegoer reviews came down mostly on two sides, for it or against it. Of the moviegoers' reviews that I read, 92% gave it 2 thumbs up, and just over 7% 2 thumbs down. Some of those on the thumbs down side took to name-calling the pro-life people as stupid, the movie is trite, religiously biased, and manipulative. Samantha Bee reviewed the movie on her late-night talk show, calling it mostly made up, unlike the really terrifying laws, and she's referring there to the heartbeat bills making their way through some state legislatures. Now, I'm not sure what part of the movie its detractors thought was made up or not factual. My guess is that it isn't the actual abortion procedures like second trimester procedure called dilation and evacuation, or the first trimester medical abortion pill RU486, or the suction procedure called aspiration or D&C. Those can't be made up. Getting the movie into the theaters was a fight all by itself for the producers from the beginning. None of the big 3 major television networks sold airtime for the trailers of the film. Only 2 cable networks did, Fox News and the Christian Broadcasting Network. And for a short period of time, Twitter banned the mention of the movie until protests became so frequent that the ban was lifted. In an ironic twist to this story of the movie's media presence, the MPAA, the Motion Picture Association of America, the organization that gives Hollywood's films its rating, gave Unplanned an R rating. Now that means that no one under 17 is allowed to see this film without a parent present. There was no swearing, no nudity, no drugs, no smoking on screen. The rating, they said, was for violence and scenes of blood. Now, there's 2 ironies in the MPAA rating. First, in many states, it's legal for a 16-year-old girl to get an abortion without her parents' consent, and yet she would be unable to buy a ticket to this movie. The second, and surely unintended irony, is that the MPAA recognizes abortion as violence done to a baby in his or her mother's womb. And yet, in spite of strong cultural and institutional wins against it, the movie finished in the top 5 grossing films, according to Box Office, for at least 2 weeks, and in the top 10 for another 3rd week. This movie has some lessons for Christians and non-Christians alike. The movie begins with a voiceover of Abby talking about making bad decisions, and she then recounts one bad decision after another. They all seem harmless in themselves, if not well thought out, but as her story unfolds, it's clear that her bad decisions led her down a pathway that was marked by lies. She was lying to her parents about her own 2 abortions, and next to her parents and fiancé by justifying her position at the clinic about defending a woman's right to reproductive health care, which was fully supported, of course, by her co-workers and the clinic administrator at Planned Parenthood. The worst decision Abby made was to lie to herself about what was really going on in the clinic. A major theme of the movie, it seemed to me, is how Abby built her life on a deadly series of lies. She obviously knew something was morally wrong about her work. When she came home one day with the blood of a woman on her shoes who had had an abortion that day, it was her little 2-year-old daughter who said something about it to her. Abby looked at her husband embarrassed by it. No words were exchanged, but the subtext was clear, and it read, "Look, your work is something we agreed not to expose our daughter to." But the other theme that clearly was woven throughout is prayer. I didn't count the number of minutes, but it seemed to me that 3/4 of the movie made reference to prayer and the need to pray. The pro-life group 40 Days for Life stood outside Abby's Bryan, Texas clinic every Saturday when abortions were being performed, and they simply prayed. The pro-life group served as a foil for the much more aggressive pro-life group at the beginning of the film. Now, whatever your view on the ways to stop abortion, it seems to me that yelling at women and calling them baby killers or murderers won't keep already troubled women from making further bad decisions. I know it's a matter of great urgency, but it seems to me that trusting in the power of the God to whom we pray is a more effective and powerful strategy. The 40 Days of Life organization prayed specifically that that clinic would close, and in 2013, it did. I learned a couple of interesting things about the pro-life movement along the way of reviewing this movie, and especially about the organizations involved in Abby's story. As I said earlier, the doctor that performed the abortion that Abby assisted portrayed himself in the film. After performing more than 1,200 abortions, Dr. Levatino stopped the practice. You can actually see his own testimony about why and how it happened when he appeared as an expert witness before a House subcommittee investigation into Planned Parenthood's medical procedures. He also has his own website explaining what happens to babies during an abortion, and his website is abortionprocedures.com. He pulls no punches in his description of those procedures. Also, check out Abby Johnson's website, abortionworker.com. It's a nonprofit organization, and she calls it "And Then There Were None." Her organization helps former abortion clinic workers find work after leaving the abortion industry. She claims that their organization has helped over 400 abortion industry workers leave the industry and find new work. Now, a personal note. For about 3 years, I worked with a woman in our church who counseled women in the aftermath of their abortions. The women that she served came to her with deep, deep regrets and profound shame. For these women, it was like they could barely breathe for all the weight of the guilt that they carried around every day. Some came to her clinic right away, but most of them came after years of carrying this weight. The clinic's mission was to help women to get past their sorrow, grief, and shame. She was the only woman, a Christian woman, in her clinic, and she led many of those women to Christ. One day she came to my office and asked me if I'd be willing to conduct a Christian worship service, something like a memorial service for the babies that the women had aborted, and make a pronouncement of Christ's forgiveness to the women. I didn't even hesitate. I agreed. We had about 4 or 5 of these memorial services. Some of the women came with a small support group of friends or fathers or sisters or, in some cases, husbands, and some came alone. It was a great sadness to hear the stories of the women and how they came to make this momentous decision. Most of them broke down in sobs of pain, and they told of their regrets. As part of the memorial, the women lit a candle for each of their babies, and they called them by name. But it was a great delight to see the relief that Christ gave them when we prayed for forgiveness, and I was able to read scriptures that pronounced the mercies of Christ to them. There is no middle ground on abortion. And that's another thing that I agree with the film critic Owen Gleiberman of Variety magazine. At the end of his review, he wrote that the whole problem with the movie Unplanned is, quote, it's that it views humanity in black and white. He was more right than he knew. Abortion has no shades of gray. Well, that's all for today. Special thanks as always to Steve, who makes it possible for Wisdom 828 to stamp out spiritual malnutrition one episode at a time. I'm Bob Buchanan. You be of good cheer.